Welcome to the Working Genius podcast, where we discuss anything and everything related to the 6 types of working genius and how it impacts your work and your life. I'm Pat Lencioni, your host, joined by Cody, Bo, and Tracy. All together, how are you guys doing?
Pretty
Fantastic.
Good.
I like it. Matt's behind the glass producing this thing, and Karen is out. But we've got Ashley sitting in here. Ashley from Atlanta sitting in, helping me out, writing wisdom pieces for me because the Lord knows I need it. So what are we talking about today, Cody?
The Working Genius Scramble.
The Scramble. What's a Scramble? Well, the truth is, Working Genius, even though it goes widget, W-I-D-G-E-T, and work kind of goes in that order theoretically. The truth is, work happens in a very unpredictable way. And it's not neatly and done in order. It's messy, and there's places where every genius can take a part. Even if it feels like we're later in the process, there's a place to work in what we like to say micro ways. The W is necessary even at the end, and the T can be important early on. And we're going to talk about how that works and how to make that a positive thing rather than a distracting thing.
Yeah. And Pat, I think, we learn this, or I learned this with you. You are an inventor. And sometimes it's really hard for you to get that discernment while you're inventing, even though that's the next step required. Occasionally what we'll have to do is encourage you and provide a little E in order to kind of foster the I.
Right. So it seems like I'm inventing. The next thing somebody needs is discernment. And you guys are like, I don't think he's ready for discernment yet. Let's just go, yeah, tell me more. That sounds great.
Exactly.
Until I get it all out. And then you go, okay, are we ready to discern that? Whereas if you discern it right away, the inventor can get kind of crushed,
Mm-hmm.
And so that's a really good way. So it's not always done in order, for instance. That's a really good way to look at it.
So the problem, Pat, is that when work is done out of order, unintentional or by accident, it can feel sort of like turbulence. It can feel like you're going from high elevation, big picture conversation all the way into the details. So how do we do this where we're allowing for life to be a little bit messier, but without it being so messy that it's exhausting and turbulent and we're feeling like we can't keep up of what elevation the conversation's at?
I think the key is this: when you're having a conversation about anything, a meeting or a talk, you need to say, hey, where are we in the process? Is this a WID meeting? Are we early in the process? Are we brainstorming? Are we an ET meeting or a GT meeting where we're just getting things done and trying to rally the troops? I think it's always important to know where you are. But that does not mean that people that have working genius types outside of what you're doing can't contribute. Because even if I'm having a WI meeting where we're brainstorming, as long as the person that comes to that meeting and says, well, I'm an ET, so I realize this is not my primary value add, and I'm going to be aware of that. Then as they're brainstorming, they can say, hey, you guys, I realize this is not a T thing, but can I give you a T perspective on this that might help you as you're doing this? That is usually really insightful and helpful. But it's very different than saying, I'm in a WI meeting, this is driving me crazy, I'm just going to drive to closure right now. That is disruptive. So it's about self-awareness. It's about calling things out and anticipating potential objections so that people can work with you, so you can use your T in a WI meeting and add value.
Yeah, and I think even as you're saying that, Pat, like you're right. This is the process of how work gets done, from wonder all the way through to tenacity. But it also, what you're describing is actually the idea process. Like work should still get done. In other words, if Tracy's sitting in that meeting, as you're inventing, she's not jumping to implementation E, like the idea that she's going to go take whatever you invented and run with it. Or somebody has tenacity, says, I'm going to go execute that right away. They're able to participate in the ideation without the work. When the work is actually going, we should be pretty careful about that, right? Like we're not moving to galvanizing or moving to tenacity right there. But I like what you said. You clarify where we're at, what the meeting is about, or where we're at in the stage of work. And that gives you the reference to say, oh, I can E this conversation without having to run and implement.
I love the way you said that, because an E in one part of the process is different than an E in another. There's another interesting thing, and Tracy just reminded me of this from our time when we worked together at another company, where there's even a place when the inventor can invent the day before something is being implemented. Now, generally, if I go to a meeting as an ID and it's the day before implementation and I'm coming up with these crazy, wild ideas, people are like, hey, Pat, I think the time for coming up with crazy, wild ideas might be over. So I can't go in there and hijack the meeting and turn it into an ID meeting. But Tracy, I like the way you described this and reminded me of something from years ago.
Yeah, when we were at our former company, we would do these huge company-wide meetings. And right before the meeting would begin, the day before, Pat would always come up with this fantastic idea to make the session even better. And he was doing these micro inventions in the middle of our implementation mode. And it actually worked. At first, it sort of stressed us out, but we knew what he was doing. We didn't have the working genius language, but we knew that it was a micro invention, and we were able to implement.
At the time. Yeah, and I remember at the time saying, "Hey, you guys, I'm going to come." I think oftentimes the last thing you do before you launch something, you come up with some idea. So it was a micro invention. It wasn't me saying all the stuff we've done up until this point. Let's just throw that out. But even then, so you can be working in an organization or on a project that's really in implementation mode, and still allow an inventor or a wonderer or a discerner to add value, but it has to be in the context of where the project is.
Yeah.
It's also so helpful for if I'm in a meeting where we're not at the phase of work where my geniuses thrive, for me to do what you said, Pat, is interpret some of what's happening. To say, hey, I know this is an ET conversation. Let me just invent a little bit. It shows that I'm holding off on some of my first instinct to make every conversation the genius that I love, but still being able to add flavor, add a dimension, and participate.
Yeah, you don't want somebody to say, hey, sit on the sidelines. If we were putting people in a box and saying, you have no place at these meetings, that's not the point of this. And we don't say to teams, hey, we're having a brainstorming meeting, only people with these geniuses can attend. That's a bad thing to do, and you're going to miss out on some really important input. So I like the fact that we're acknowledging that it's messy. And as Ashley said, and when there's trust on the team and self-awareness, it allows you to tap into this because everybody knows you're just trying to help.
It's interesting because as you're saying that, I mean, you guys talked about in the ideation sort of meeting or the invention right before executing an event. I think that's what's so interesting that when a team is swimming in this, like when we use this every day, and this becomes a highly leveraged way of using Working Genius. Like I've even thought like we've just in the last 2 days, we've said things like, hey, Bo, we need you to galvanize that meeting. That's not like, we don't have to start with wonder to say like, well, let's wonder what it's like. No, use your gift of galvanizing to get everyone rallied around that meeting. Or just today, I was like, Julie, you have tenacity. Can you put this idea or this conversation on your list so that I know it gets, and then keep cracking the whip or bothering me until it gets done, So we can use Working Genius and leverage it in different ways. And I think that's what you're talking about, like in micro ways and macro ways. As long as you have the context of what you're talking about and you know what someone's trying to give you in that moment and what you need, you can navigate all of that using Working Genius.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. This becoming part of the vocabulary, and when you go to somebody and say, I need your I, that's a wonderful, I need your T. That's a wonderful way to make it what seems messy, really impactful. Bo?
Pat, I want to have you unpack more of what you just kind of mentioned a minute ago, which is about trust and how that is at the foundation of all of this, whether we're talking about the macro level of Working Genius or the micro level. What does trust have to do with that?
Well, the idea of trust is vulnerability-based trust. And it's like, hey, I can try my best to add value. And if it doesn't work and somebody says to me, hey, that's not really what we need right now, and you know that the person will go, oh, I'm sorry, I see. That people are not afraid to be wrong, and that nobody's worried that someone's intentions are anything but trying to help. So like you, Bo, you're a big G, and you come to a meeting and you're Gene, and we could say to you, hey, Bo, I think this is not the right time to G. Trust allows you to know that we're not trying to make you look bad, that you're going to go, oh, okay, sorry, you guys. And we're like, no problem. And without that trust, though, we might not feel comfortable saying that to you. You might keep going. And then after the meeting, we're going to say, let's not have him at this meeting next time. And that's just crap. And so we trust allows us not to have crap.
I love that. Even that vulnerability-based trust comment, the other way it played out, in fact, just in a conversation maybe a couple hours ago, I was in a meeting with Julie and I was sort of galvanizing a decision that I thought we had made. And she is a discerner, tenacity person. And so she was like, okay, how do we get this done? And went straight to tenacity and didn't really feel like I was giving her an opportunity to push back with her discernment on the idea. And then she called me about an hour after that meeting and said, hey, I feel really bad. This is the vulnerability. The vulnerable part was like, I feel really bad. I was giving you my tenacity and I actually had some reservations from discernment, but I thought if I said it in that meeting that it would come across like I wasn't willing to do what you're asking me to do. So I went straight to tenacity mode. And so it was just having that language, and that builds so much trust to say like, oh, we can go back. We can go back to discernment and make sure everybody's on the same page before we move on from that. But that was an example of the vulnerability that you're talking about.
And that's beautiful, because it's one thing to say, hey, I just disagree with you. But to be able to say, I want to discern that some more, puts it in the context of a genius that we all want from each other, rather than feeling like there's something personal involved in that. So that's a great story.
I think that we've mentioned most of the geniuses in this conversation, but not as much about wonder. So Pat, I'd love to hear, what does that look like when wonder is not done in order? Or what does it look like if somebody is wondering in GET mode? What does it look like for them to bring that?
I think it's the difference between macro wonder and micro wonder. And I've worked with people before. I've worked with WTs. And it's one thing if in the T phase of work, they come there and they're like, hey, I wonder if there's not a better way to do this last piece, or maybe there's a different way we could go around going about finishing that. That's like using wonder in the right context. But sometimes I've worked with people, they're like, why are we even doing this project? It's like, oh, no. See, that period passed long ago. So macro wonder is like calling into question everything. Micro wonder would be applying the genius of wonder to the given context of the task at hand. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
totally. I would even say like, you as the inventor, the day before the event that you talked about pulling off, you would say, here's an idea to make it better. A wonderer might say, they shouldn't say, why are we even having this event to begin with? But what they could say is, hey, I know before we go out there tomorrow, is there anything that we could do that would make this even better? They probably don't have the answer to that question, but they can spark the wonder around it. And then hopefully someone like Pat or Bo with invention goes, oh, I love that. What's a micro invention we could do to make this even better? And that's a perfect way to use it in that context.
I was in a meeting last week. Wonder is one of my competencies. And I was in a meeting with people wondering, 3 wanderers last week. Tracy and I both were. And I was amazed at what they were doing that I can't do. And wonder is often overlooked. Like the ability of a person to ponder things and to just look around and saying, maybe there's something missing without knowing what that thing is. And I was so tired. And it was really neat to see wonder playing out and realizing that, because it's really easy for people to discount wonder, like, what good is that? I'll just go, maybe this would be a better idea or something. But it was just really something to watch 3 wanderers going to town and me getting tired.
That was so fun for me as well, Pat. I think we often move quickly through wonder. And this meeting was specifically a 3-hour meeting to really sit in the wonder and invention. And man, that was fun.
Yeah. And good things came of it. But I'm glad for their sake, I'm glad I wasn't there the whole time. And I'm also glad that I knew that I was not a wanderer and that I needed to let them do their job and celebrate that. So it was an interesting thing. And the point of all this is working genius is messy. There's room for W's from the beginning to the end in the right context. There's room for T's from the beginning to the end in the right context. And there's room for everybody as long as we know who we are, we trust one another, and we can call out like, hey, I'm going to apply a slightly different letter here to the process. And usually that is a huge value add. And if it's not, people trust each other enough to say, yeah, I think that's a little early for that or a little late for that. And people go, that's fine.
Pat, I'm going to demonstrate the very thing we're talking about because I can tell that this podcast is coming to an ET close. And I'm going to go back to galvanizing for a minute, which is I just want to tell people more and more about our certification program, because we've had now a couple thousand people go through that to learn how to leverage Working Genius, whether you're a team leader or you're an independent consultant or coach, or you're a team member that just wants to know more about this. It's fun to see all the industries. We had one group of 40 go through the other day, and one of our teachers even said that master facilitator said there were people represented from like 7 different countries on that one. And so it's just really cool to see all the ways that people are embracing Working Genius and getting to the point where they're swimming in it the way that we do on this podcast. So aside from the next step from taking the assessment, listening to the podcast, if you're interested at all in going as deep as possible on Working Genius, the certification program that we have is really amazing way to digest all that information and become a master yourself.
And there's a lot of consultants that are doing that, but there's a lot of leaders that are doing that. And people just want to learn something that they're going to apply and maybe later start a business around or use it in the context of whatever kind of work they're doing. And as I like to say, we had a zookeeper do it who wanted to use it with the other zookeepers who worked with the elephants, which I thought was totally cool. All right. Thank you, Cody. Well, that brings us to the end of this podcast. We want to thank everybody for joining us. We love to get your feedback and your input. And we just appreciate so much that you are out there helping other people discover their God-given geniuses so they can experience more dignity and joy and energy in their life. So thanks for doing that, everybody. And we'll talk to you next time on the Working Genius podcast. God bless.